Have you ever gotten to the end of a long day and felt like your brain just quits? Like you can't make one more choice? Well, it turns out there's this hidden force that's draining our mental energy, and it can totally change the course of our lives, one decision at a time. So let's get into it and uncover the surprising science of decision fatigue.
Okay, so our story kicks off with this really fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling study from back in 2011. Researchers looked at a group of judges making one of the heaviest decisions you can imagine, whether or not to grant someone parole. So, what do you think would be the #1 factor in their decision? I mean, logically, you'd assume it's all about the case, right? The crime they committed, how long their sentence was, or how they behaved in prison. You know, the rational stuff. But what the data showed was something else entirely, something nobody expected.
And the results were just staggering. Get this, the study found that prisoners who had their hearing early in the day were granted parole about 70% of the time. But what about those who showed up late in the day? Their parole rate absolutely plummeted to less than 10%. We're talking about people with almost identical cases getting completely different outcomes.
That's right. The one thing that had the biggest impact wasn't the crime, it wasn't the sentence, it was just what time it was. The researchers figured out that the judges were just mentally exhausted, and when their energy was low, they just defaulted to the simplest, safest choice, saying no. And this, right here, is the key to this whole explainer.
So, what these judges were going through, this phenomenon, it actually has a name. It's called decision fatigue. And this isn't just about feeling a little sleepy. It's a very specific type of mental burnout that has huge effects on how we think and what we do.
Here's the core idea. Decision fatigue is basically a state of cognitive burnout. It starts to creep in after you've made a whole string of choices, whether they're big or small. You can think of it like your brain's decision-making muscle just getting totally overworked and exhausted.
And when you're in that state, your behavior really starts to change. You get more impulsive, splurging on that thing you don't really need after a long day of work. Your confidence in your own choices just tanks, which leads to all that second guessing and anxiety. And all that cognitive exhaustion, it impacts everything, from what you buy at the grocery store to the big moves you make in your career.
So why does this even happen? Well, it turns out our ability to make good, solid decisions isn't endless. We kind of have a daily limit, a threshold, for how much mental heavy lifting we can do before our judgment starts to get fuzzy.
A really good way to picture this is to think of your decision-making power like a battery in your phone. You wake up in the morning with a full charge, but every single choice you make, from what to wear to how to answer an email, drains a tiny bit of that power. And just like your phone, you've got to be smart about how you use that limited battery life.
So, what are the big culprits that drain your decision battery? Well, first, it's just the sheer number of decisions we make. Then you've got complexity. A simple choice is a tiny drain, but a really complicated one can take a huge chunk of power. And finally, there's novelty. Facing a brand new situation or choice takes way more mental energy than something you do every day on autopilot.
And of course, not all decisions drain that battery at the same speed. There's a massive difference in the mental energy you need for those tiny, everyday choices versus the huge, life-changing ones.
Think about it like this. Choosing breakfast is a low-stakes, routine thing. You barely notice the energy it takes. But what if your car suddenly breaks down and you have to buy a new one, like today? That's high stakes, it's totally unexpected, and there are a million things to consider. A decision like that can completely wipe out your mental battery for the day in one single shot.
And this is where it gets really serious. For people in professions like medicine or law, where they have to make one high-stakes decision after another all day long with no break, this isn't just about making a poor choice. Decision fatigue can lead to critical, sometimes even life-or-death mistakes.
Okay, so we get the problem. It sounds a little grim, right? But the good news is there are actual concrete things you can do in your own life to manage that mental energy and fight back against decision fatigue. Let's break them down.
First, and this is the most powerful one, just make fewer decisions. Seriously, automate the small stuff. People like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg famously wore the same thing every day for a reason. It's one less choice draining that precious battery. Second, here's a neat mental trick. Pretend you're giving advice to a friend. This creates a little psychological distance, it takes your ego and emotion out of it, and it helps you see the choice much more clearly. And finally, learn to triage your decisions. You have to consciously decide to relax about the small stuff because not every choice deserves your A game. Save that battery power for the big decisions that are actually going to shape your work, your health, and your happiness.
And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. As you go about your day, start paying attention to your own decision battery.
Ask yourself, what's one little routine choice you can just eliminate, automate, or simplify starting tomorrow? What can you do to free up that vital mental energy for the things that truly, truly matter?